chemical concept of the brain. And in fact leads to the discovery of the neurotransmitters. The fact that a drug used in such tiny quantities could have such big effects indicates that there's probably a dedicated chemical and neurotransmitter for it. So it puts us on the path that give us the SSRI antidepressants.
So it's made that massive contribution to science already. Now, you didn't just talk to people about psychedelics, did you, as a journalist?
No.
You went on a kind of...
Immersion journalism, we call it.
Emerging journalism.
Immersion.
Emergent journalism. You went on a few research trips.
I did. I mean, I wanted to know what this was like. And so I arranged a series of guided trips. And it's very important to make a distinction between the recreational use of these drugs, taking a handful of mushrooms, going to a concert, or the way they're being used in clinical and therapeutic experience, which is essentially you're with someone the whole time. They prepare you for what's about to happen. They give you some advice on how to handle difficulties that arise, and they often do. So, for example, if you feel you're going crazy or dying or your ego is dissolving, go with it. Don't fight it. If you fight it, you'll get very anxious. If you see a staircase, go up it. If you see a window, open it. So just go through it. Go through the experience. Surrender, very key word.
How safe did you feel? We all have anxieties, we all have worries, and from what you're describing, you're confronting some very, very profound things within your deepest self.
I was terrified every time. I was kind of a nervous Nelly about the whole thing. The night before each of my journeys was a sleepless night with myself arguing with myself, saying, are you crazy? Why are you doing this? You're like a 58-year-old man. You're going to go up on this mountain with this guy you barely know. What if you have a heart attack? Is he going to call 911? Is he going to call for help?
Because after all, this is
illegal.
Yeah.
This is purely illegal. And do I trust this person? And the other side is saying, aren't you curious to know what it'll be like? You've got a book to write. And in the end, my more adventurous self won out. And I found in each case, by the point I had ingested the molecule, whether it was LSD or psilocybin or some other ones I tried, and went past the point of no return, I was able to relax and surrender. Better than I thought I'd be. I did not resist. And fundamentally, that's because I had trust in my guides. I had interviewed many people, I had picked people I had this sense of confidence with. So that's very important to understand. The preparation, the being present during the experience, just as someone to hold your hand. You're also wearing eye shades, so it's an internal experience. It's not something where you're kind of grooving on what your senses are bringing. You're going inside. You have headphones. You're listening to music, too. That's a very important part of the experience. And then afterwards, your guide helps you integrate what happened, make sense of what is a very confusing experience, and help you figure out how to apply whatever you learn to the conduct of your life. So that's what the experience was in each case for me. And I worked with LSD, psilocybin on 2 occasions, ayahuasca, which is an amaretto brew of 2 plants containing DMT, is the key ingredient there. That's the psychedelic. And a very obscure one called 5-MeO-DMT, which is the smoked venom of the Sonoran desert toad.
You smoked toad?
I smoked toad, yeah. And that was...
I don't know what happened.
That's the only one I regret.
When you smoked toad.
Well, DMT is a very fast-acting, powerful psychedelic. In this form, you have not even completed your inhalation before you feel like you've been shot out of a cannon. I didn't remember exhaling. I didn't remember lying down. I'm smoking on this pipe. It's crystallized. Basically, the venom is you can milk the toad. You kind of gently squeeze its legs and its side, and it squirts out this liquid that you catch on a piece of glass. I didn't do this, but the woman who administered it to me did. And then it dries overnight and crystallizes. It looks like brown sugar. And so she burns this and you inhale the smoke. And, I had not only complete dissolution of any sense of self, I no longer existed, but time no longer existed, matter no longer existed. I was in this field of pure energy. It felt like this Category 5 mental storm. But it wasn't confined to my head because there was no border between my skull and the universe. It was horrible. It was terrifying. And I thought, well, is this death? Is this what happens at death? Is this where your mind goes? The best thing about the experience is it was over in about 15 minutes. And within 12 or 15 minutes, I could feel myself reconsolidating. And I could reach down and I thought, oh, I have a body, how great. And I could feel the mattress, and there's matter. Matter is back. And time was back. And I felt so grateful. And this is when it became an ecstatic experience. But it's not the kind of ecstasy you want. I became so grateful for existing. And, you know, not only for, I mean, we've all been grateful for being alive.
Yeah.
Everyone has expressed that, I assume. I was grateful that there was anything at all. I was grateful that there was something rather than nothing.
Sure.
And it was profound, this feeling.
Was it worth the horror for that realization?
No, I don't think so.
Was that your experience with all of your psychedelic researches?
They were very different. This one was the most disturbing and most upsetting and the hardest to describe. It truly was ineffable. I had other experiences that were much more positive, all through.
Help me understand, of the insights, and I in the book I've read of many, many important things, but what was the most profound or enlightening experience that you experienced, that you had trying these different
Yeah, it was an experience I had on psilocybin, which is the magic mushroom. I was actually eating the mushrooms, not the synthetic version that's used in the trial, the above ground drug trial. And I had a high dose. I was actually trying to use the same dose being used now at Imperial College and at other trials, Johns Hopkins, to see what that was like. And I stepped up the dose gradually with my guide, and the experience didn't begin that well. She was playing bad music, or what I regarded as bad music. It sounded like very electronic, and it's amazing how powerful the music is in the environment you're in. Synesthesia is a very common effect on psychedelics. It's a huge sense of smell it, feel it, and for me it conjured this landscape that was this kind of computer-generated world. I felt like I was in a video game for a very long time, and it was all black, and it wasn't scary, but it was like not where I wanted to be. And I was sort of stuck in there for a long time. And she changed the music, and I was still in computer world. And at some point, I felt this anxiety rising, and I decided I needed a little break. I also needed to pee. So I took off my blindfold, and it was amazing. I wanted to make sure the world was still existing, and it was. Mm-hmm. And there were doors and windows and furniture. It was wonderful. But they were different. They were jeweled with light, and they were shooting these little beams of light right to me. And it was kind of remarkable, and I had to get to the bathroom, and my guide, who was a woman about my age, she took me by the elbow and guided me across her room to the bathroom, and I went into the bathroom, and I didn't want to look in the mirror. I just did not know what I would see. It just seemed like a high-risk proposition. And so as I described in the book, I produced a spectacular crop of diamonds. It was really the most amazing urination anyone has ever had. And these are the kind of experiences you have. I'm being frank. And I appreciate it. Afterward, I got back to the mattress I was on, and she was kneeling right next to the head of the mattress, and she said, "Do you want a booster? Do you want more?" And I had agreed to go up to this level, equivalent to 25 milligrams, and I looked at her as she was handing me the mushroom, and she had completely transformed. She was blonde. She has hair parted in the middle. She's blonde. She has high cheekbones, and she's very attractive. And she had turned into a Mexican Indian. She had black hair now, a white peasant dress, leathery skin, and her hands were just the hands of an old woman. And I knew who she had turned into. I recognized her immediately. She was Maria Sabina, who was a famous figure in the history of psilocybin as the Mexican curandera, or healer, who gave the first Westerner an experience on psilocybin in 1955. Happens to be the year I was born. and he brought the news of psilocybin to the West in a famous article.
This is something you'd obviously discovered in your research for this.
Yeah. Oh, it's coming out of my memory, obviously, but it's real now.
You were really, really high at this point.
I was, but I was still going to get a little higher.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I take the mushroom from her, from Maria Sabina, and I'm afraid to tell Mary, the name of my guide, what happened to her. I later learned she was flattered to be turned into Maria Sabina. She was a personal hero.
Okay.
And I take the additional mushroom, and then I put the eye shades back on, and when the mushroom comes on, I had this, the most profound experience I've had on all these psychedelics, which is the experience of watching myself disintegrate. I was turned into a sheaf of little papers the size of papers. And yet, who's this I who's observing this? There was this other consciousness that could watch myself decompose. Yet, I had no desire to pull it back together, to gather all those papers back together into my accustomed self. And then I looked out again, and I was spread over the landscape like a coat of paint. And that was me, out there. But I was perceiving this from this new vantage that I had never experienced before, that was fine with it, completely untroubled, objective, disinterested. And I don't know what that consciousness was to this day. Aldous Huxley would say it was the mind at large, some consciousness that transcends the person. I don't know if that's true. I think it's consciousness produced by the mind, by the brain. But it taught me something very important, which is that I'm not identical to my ego. That chatter, that neurotic voice that's, urging us on, perfectionist, recriminations, regrets about the past, worries about the future, that voice, which I give a lot of credit to, it got the book written. Nevertheless, it's partially, I wasn't identical to it. There was another ground on which to stand, and that was really profound. And then I brought that to our integration session, and I told her about it, and she said, well, wow, don't you think that's worth the price of admission? And I said, yes, but now my ego is back in uniform and under control. I'm back to baseline, so what good was that? And she said something of reacting to what life throws at you, and the ego is trigger happy, basically, and defensive. You can cultivate that. And I've been cultivating that ever since, through meditation and other means. But to me, that was a big takeaway, that and I've gotten a certain distance on my ego that I didn't have before. That's been very helpful.
And do you think, in terms of applying, as a lot of scientists are now increasingly becoming interested in doing, looking at where these drugs can be used in research, is that idea of the ego being dissolving and could that be one of the key powers of these medicines?
I think
is that
it is.
the idea?
I think it is. I mean, the researchers who have worked with this, both in the UK and in America, find that the people who respond best are the ones who have had what they call a complete mystical experience in America. In England, they don't like that language quite as much. The spiritualists know that. And they talk about ego dissolution. And people who had an experience of complete or nearly complete ego dissolution seem to be the ones who respond. Why should that be? Well, as I had a new perspective on myself, these people may attain a new perspective on themselves. And that we get trapped in ego thinking, and the ego is can be very punishing. Freud wrote about so to have some relief from that part may be what's helping people break out of those habits of thought. There are other ways to understand it, other brain structures that may be implicated, but it seems to be that there was a researcher in the 50s who called it therapy by self-transcendence. Maybe what's going on. Too soon to say for sure.
I was going to say, how ready is the scientific community and the psychiatric community?
Yeah.
Some of the things you've described, some people would be terrifying and potentially quite dangerous if you do agree.
I think that there is definite risk, psychological risk. So, being a nervous Nelly, I did my due diligence as a journalist to figure out before I was rolling the dice in my brain, what was I doing? Was I stupid to do this or not? So I looked at the risk profile. On the physiological level, in terms of the body, the risks were milder than I expected them to be. These are relatively non-toxic drugs. There is no known lethal dose of LSD or psilocybin. You have drugs in your medicine cabinet that you bought without prescription that have a lethal dose and are more toxic to your body. And the psychiatric drugs we give people have very high toxicity very often. They're also non-addictive. If you give LSD to a rat in the cage with the usual setup where they can administer drugs to themselves, and they'll press it for cocaine until they die, preferred to food. With LSD, they'll do it once and they won't do it again. It's just too disturbing. So, non-addictive, relatively non-toxic. That leaves the psychological risks, and those are real. People at risk for serious psychiatric illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, personality disorders, should not use these drugs, and they will be screened out of any trials. Even underground therapists will screen them out. So it's very important to have the screening that a guide brings. And even other people can have what are called bad episodes that are terrifying, as I had. Some of them are just panic reactions that go away. So we're very different anxiety. Very careful, and that's an argument with the guide. In the above-ground trials going on now at many universities, there have been more than 1,000 administrations of psilocybin, just to take one example, and not a single serious adverse event. So the risk is diminished when you have a guided situation, and especially when it's above ground. But without question, I mean, these are psychologically intense experiences. In terms of where the science is, we have a long way to go. I mean, we have done some very interesting pilot studies. There's a phase 2 study, which is further along with a larger group in the United States that produced excellent results in cancer patients, helping them reduce their symptoms of anxiety and depression. And it had a dramatic effect, an unprecedented treatment effect. Effect size. But we still have a long way to go. Depression, we're just beginning to study. There's been a pilot study at Imperial College, very promising, but needs to be duplicated and will be duplicated soon on a much larger scale. So we're several years out from this becoming an actual medicine. The attitude of psychiatrists we talk to, many psychiatrists who are diagnosed what I do as a psychotic episode. That's a problem because it had no lasting negative effect. And yeah, I guess if your criteria say loss of personality, hallucination, that sounds like psychosis, but in fact it's not. Very early on in the history of LSD research, they called it a psychotomimetic, and they thought it could mimic psychosis. But I think that's a mistake.
Given your experience of it, are you less afraid of these drugs now when you work with them?
I still have a healthy fear. One of the thoughts I had after my psilocybin experience was like, I had a fear that some kind of underlying madness would emerge, and that there was unresolved stuff that would come up, and it would be very disturbing. And I emerged from it thinking, wow, I thought I was. And but my guide said, well, on any given day, it can turn out differently, and there still might be childhood trauma you could get in touch with. So I would approach it, if I were to do it again, with the same kind of healthy fear. I don't feel like I would ever do that.
Just to go back, I just interject there a bit. In terms of cancer patients, people are sense of how benefits might that have. What you described is just crazy and out there. How How did people explain to you what benefit they took away from taking you?
Well, I'll tell you the story of one woman I interviewed, Dinah Baser. She was a 60-ish figure skating instructor who lived in Manhattan. And she had ovarian cancer, but she was paralyzed by fear. And she just couldn't do anything. She was just sure that it was something. She heard about this trial. She never used psychedelics and was admitted at NYU. And she had a very powerful experience, part of which involved of imagining she was going into her body. And in her case, what she saw was not her cancer. It was a black mass underneath her ribcage, but she knew it wasn't cancer in the wrong place. And she realized what it was fear. And this black mass had occupied her body, and the black mass disappeared. And other things happened in her that we had a very ecstatic experience after that, where she said, but she said she felt bathed in God's love.
That's how she described it.
That's how she described it. And when I said, but you're an atheist, and she said, yes, but we have no word big enough for what I felt. It was the ineffability again.
Yeah.
But on the fear question, afterwards, she told me that I understood at that moment that I can't control the cancer. It's either going to come back or not, but I can control the fear. That's in my head. I have sovereignty over that. And that insight, which was incredibly authoritative to her, removed her fear.
But that sounds like something a pain consultant or someone would have explained to her. You know, you can manage your fear.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have believed it. You wouldn't have believed it. And that speaks to the authority of the psychedelic experience. William James, when he was writing about the mystical experience, which this is, psychocriteria, said that one of its hallmarks is the noetic quality of the experience, by which he meant what happened is objectively true. It's not even an opinion, it's not an insight, it's revealed truth. And that authority is, I think, what allows people to actually change their behavior or their thinking habits. You know, I interviewed smokers, like, well, I realize my breath is precious, and how stupid to kill myself. And I had that thought, but it didn't stick. And with the psychedelic experience, it's became much stickier.
That's what I was going to ask you next. You've had these experiences. Have they stayed with you? Have they damaged your brain in some way? Or have they lasted with you in a positive way? I think that's what people would worry about.
Yeah.
Can I control? There seems no control.
Well, that's what my wife worried about when I embarked on it.
I can see.
She had a lot of trepidation. She was very happy I was going to write on a new subject.
Yeah.
She thinks you should move on in your work, and she was probably sick of hearing me talk about food, what I've been writing about for the last 2 years. And but she said, you know, we've been married a very long time, that you're going to have this big experience, and I'm not part of it, and you could change. What she didn't think of is that I might change for the better, which is finally what she concluded. So the changes that have lasted, I think, stem from what I said earlier about a little bit of distance on my ego. I kind of can stop myself when I'm reacting defensively to things. I also think I'm somewhat more open emotionally than I was, and more. I have an easier time talking about my feelings. I was not a very emotional person. It's something interesting. You're not the first journalist to ask me this question, and I asked her. She's a great expert on us, you know, but our partner. And she said my dad died. I was very depressed. I visited my mother in New York for the last 10 days or so, and spent a lot of time with him in his bed. And it was a very intense experience. And you know, one of the things our egos defend us against is death. Think about it. My guess is that before I'd had these experiences, I would have found excuses not to be there so much and not to be so open. Very, very painful. I sort of felt like I was able to say what I needed to say to my father, to my sisters, to my son. And I was very touching. Yeah, I don't know.
A lot of the early research, there was a certain amount of overlap. You really described it in the book, some of the skills in their assumptions of their theory. You're a liberal, I assume liberally minded, well-educated American. Do you think the rest of the world is ready to accept some of the, I don't know, just the language, the attitude that might be needed to see these actually become medicines, become actual drugs? You know, everything that's tied into it.
I think it's very useful if they prove out in research whatever the mechanism, put it in spiritual terms, in psychodynamic terms, they will be embraced. You have to understand what a mental health crisis is. I mean, that rates of depression are up 18% worldwide. In 2005, there were 300 million people with major depression. 100 million of those have not responded to treatment. Suicide rates are climbing very quickly. And addiction is rampant. So we have a big problem, and we don't have a lot of tools. There has not been much innovation since the SSRIs, really, in the late 80s, early 90s.
Those are the mainstream antidepressants.
Yes, and mainstream antidepressants. And so I think if these drugs work and they prove out in the trials they're being subjected to now, they will be embraced. I don't think people care about whether it's a spiritual experience or whatever it is, or a reboot of the brain. You know, we have to find language to talk about people. Pharmaceutical companies will be working on that, for sure. Some people are very comforted by the idea that it's a spiritual experience. Others are not. You know, I think they're weird. I mean, it's important to understand that they'll be difficult to fit into the framework we have now of how we treat mental health. Because you're really not prescribing a chemical exactly. You're prescribing an experience. And it is unless you have the experience, you don't have the effect. And that experience is a psychological experience. We've been used to either we do talk therapy or drug therapy. Here we have to combine both. And it really shouldn't even be called psychedelic therapy. It's psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. You need to die, you need the whole package. How is that going? You know, the pharmaceutical industry is used to selling pills you take every day. This can only do once in life. So how do they make money? And the psychotherapy world also makes money. This involves two people for most of the day, once in a while. So it's a square peg in a round hole, and that'll all take you need to invent a new container.
You would argue sometimes there's always there. So around that hole for a square peg, I have to put a big hole on the left.
Well, for a long time, you know, people involved talk therapy. And that was psychotherapy. It was brainless. We weren't paying attention to the brain's role in mental illness. And then we swung the other way with drugs. And then it was mindfulness, basically. And here we combine the brain with a unified therapeutic program, if it works. So it'll be, and as many of the researchers will tell you, if you ask them, this could be a revolution in mental health.
No fear.
Had an arrow with a sticking in it.
So, hey, speaking of near-death experience, I wanted to ask you this because I listen to your podcast a lot, and I know you talk about DMT and, you know, some of the stuff you see when, you know, like it produces in your mind or you produce it in your body, right? Is that the chemical that you release like when you die or when you have like a near-death experience?
They believe so. Here's the deal. They didn't know for sure until really recently that it was even produced by the pineal gland. Now that they know, there's a The guy named
So it is produced by them?
There's a guy named Rick Strassman, Dr. Rick Strassman, out of the University of New Mexico, and he put together these clinical trials that were the first ever FDA-approved clinical trials on a psychedelic drug, first ever on DMT, and they were done in New Mexico, and he did them, and he wrote a book about it called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And one of the things that he found, it's a great book, and one of the things he found really fascinating, and I read the book before I ever did DMT, the thing that he found really fascinating was that these people had these uniform experiences.
Yeah.
It wasn't like one person saw this thing and then another person had a totally different trip. No, they all had like fairly uniform experiences. And here's the other thing that's really fascinating. Their experiences in many ways mirror the experiences of people that have been abducted by aliens and people that have near-death experiences. And the connection, they think, is that the brain produces this chemical called dimethyltryptamine. And we know that it's produced by the liver, we know that it's produced by the lungs, and then in Eastern mysticism, it was always thought that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul, that it was the third eye, that literally in reptiles it has a retina and a cornea, and actually it's like literally an eyeball in the center of your head. And in the Vatican, there's a gigantic sculpture of a pine cone in the Vatican. And that pine cone is supposed to represent the pineal gland. See if you can get a photo of that gigantic pine cone. And I was actually in the Vatican last summer, and I had a conversation with a guy. We had this really cool guy who was a professor who was explaining to us all the different stuff that, it's all the different symbolisms and what they mean. And their Eastern mysticism and a lot of ancient religions have always been heavily focused on the pine cone and pineal gland. And that is what that's supposed to represent, that gigantic pine cone in the middle of
There's something now, people smoke pine cone, or there's some...
Really?
People, yeah, there's some...
People smoke socks if you give them to them.
But
some
apparently
people are
it's
assholes.
like... No, but I heard that. I mean, I heard that now that there's some sort of... Because DMT is like a plant, right? Plant-based,
Yes,
right?
That is the thing, is that the DMT doesn't just exist in one plant, it exists in thousands of different plants.
Sure.
That's why they have ayahuasca. And what ayahuasca is an orally active DMT. So DMT, normally when you eat it, your body produces something in your digestive tract called monoamine oxidase.
That blocks it, right?
Yeah. And so what ayahuasca is DMT from one plant and an MAO inhibitor from another plant. And they combine it together and they create an orally active DMT. Because otherwise you'd just be tripping every time you eat a salad. Like you get some wheatgrass juice, you chip your balls off, but your body